Hi, I'm Bai Macfarlane with Mary's Advocates, and we work to uphold marriage, especially against no-fault divorce. And I have with me today a guest that a lot of you know, Stephen Baskerville. Thank you so much. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about your background? And I'm going to hold up your two books, which many of them know.
Right. Okay. Well, I am and was a politics professor of politics. I've worked at several universities in Europe and the United States. And about same time as you, about 25 years ago, I got a rude awakening into the divorce system. And I decided to retool my operations to some extent, my research focus. And I've decided that this is such an egregious injustice and irregularity and violation of everything I believe, not to mention the Constitution of the United States, that I decided to make this the focus of my work. And after having written a book about revolutions in England in the 17th century, I shifted and decided to write a book about the book that you're holding now, Taken into Custody, which was my first book on the divorce system. It focuses on it. I've written many articles also on it. And that shows the system, as you say, of no-fault divorce, its injustices, the irregularities of the family courts, and the whole government. And then the next book I wrote, that one, the New Politics of Sex, I discovered that what I found in the divorce system was only a small part, albeit the most important part, I still believe, and the most egregious, the most unjust part of all. But also I saw a pattern in in many other areas of the law and of politics involving sex or gender relations, family relations. And I began to see that what was taking place in the family courts and with the divorce system was only a part of many other areas of injustice and irregularities and frankly, just government chicanery and corruption taking place in areas like, in areas of the courts, especially, and in the legislatures and elsewhere in the state and federal governments of the U.S. and other countries too, especially the Anglophone countries, Canada, Britain, Australia, New Zealand, but also other European countries. So that's how I got into this.
And I'm really happy to have you with me because I come at this from the perspective of a serious Catholic, a person who married within the Catholic Church. And when you marry in the Catholic Church, the Catholics actually recognize two different forms of governance. There's the governance in the civil form in the state. They're responsible for roads and maybe taxes for different things and maybe some just military and how you handle money and court systems for upholding contracts. That's the state forum for governance. But we as Catholics also have a church forum for governance. And when parties marry, when you marry without the Catholic Church, you're just marrying maybe in some other Christian affiliation or some other religious rite or entity, or you're marrying outside of any religious affiliation and you're just registering that you're married with the state. And for centuries, really since polygamy kind of went out of popularity, I'm going to guess around the 300s. I don't really know about that. But since polygamy wasn't popular anymore, cultures that were civilized understood that marriage was permanent, open to children, and you're not running around committing adultery. If you were committing adultery, that was something bad to your spouse, bad to the community, and bad for your children. And the sexual revolution happened. Thomas More and King Henry VIII had their debate. So there's been differences. And now Catholics, do you hear a kind of birdie sound? Is that something outside?
I think it's an alarm. Sorry. Yes,
okay.
It's a police siren or something. Yeah.
Well, I guess they don't like what I'm talking about. They're coming after me. I live really close to a police department, so when the fire trucks go by, I used to say to the kids, they're coming to get me. So from a Catholic perspective, you get married and you get married in the Catholic governance system and you agree to certain things. You agree to permanence. You're going to be married till one of you dies. You agree to sexual fidelity. You're not committing adultery. If you do commit adultery, it's such a grievous offense that it's a legitimate reason for separation, which is different than a legitimate reason for permanently ending your marriage as if you're not married anymore. It's just separation. And then you also agree that you're going to raise your kids together. You're not going to swap out a new husband down the road or swap out a new mom where like dad gets tired of mom and finds a younger model. So then the kids go back and forth. It's like none of that has anything to do with Catholic marriage. But sometimes there is a legitimate reason for separation for Catholics, but it's based in justice and it's based in making reparation as much as possible. So if one party, like I said, commits adultery, that's an offense against marriage. And it's such a grievous offense that it could be a legitimate reason for permanent separation of spouses. But this is still different than when you go to the state court for divorce. And in the Catholic perspective, if someone is gravely dangerous or like drug addict and spending all the family money, there could be reasons to separate your money, or there could be reasons to have someone stay out of the home. I mean, if a woman is like really mentally ill and dangerous, the husband needs to have the kids protected. So, I mean, you've heard about this. The fault-based reasons for separation of spouses is how Catholics view it. And then if there is a fault-based reason for separation of spouses, abandonment is also a reason where one might need help to get finances. In the old days, before no-fault divorce, if you went to the state for help in a situation like any of these, the state would recognize fault. So if a husband abandoned his wife, like the townsfolk are going to be, what? You can't do this. You're leaving us to take care of your wife and your kids? Sorry, mister. Like that was a crime sometimes to abandon your spouse. But nowadays, anyone can abandon anyone. They can go to the government. And then what the government does as the outcome is this no fault stuff where they're treated the same. And Catholics are only supposed to go to the civil forum when there's certain criteria established. There has to be a serious reason for permanent separation of spouses in the first place, or a reason for needing to go to the state to get some kind of relief where going to the state would make you better than you were before you went to the state. But, and I think a lot of folks still, at least when I went through my experience, because I got into this also because I was a defendant in a no-fault divorce and I was dumbfounded. I thought courts were justice. And I've heard people more recently thought the only way you can get a divorce if you've done nothing wrong is both people want it. So on paper, you've got mom and dad agreeing to be separated. Doesn't that look so nice and amicable? But
Yeah.
Steve, what's really going on?
Well, yes, as you say, that's the common sense position. It's what many people, I think, still believe. Certainly, people of our age now. That young people nowadays seem to have a little less, more disabused of the situation. But what you're describing as the Catholic position is basically it was the Christian position for centuries. The Protestants, I must say, I'm ashamed to say, had a lot to do with transferring the jurisdiction over to the state, but the basic assumptions were the same, and they were, basically incorporated into the common law in the English-speaking countries. I mean, the same assumptions that grounds that you had to have recognized that marriage was for life. It's a legally binding contract as well as a sacred Christian covenant, and that it's for life, and that if you wanted to get out of it, you had to adduce recognized grounds for doing so. Now, and when the Americans took over this and had 50 different laws in 50 different states, things would vary, but there was still the concept that you had to have legally recognized grounds. The grounds could vary in different jurisdictions, but people had to know what the grounds were. If you do this, if you commit adultery, if you abandon the home, in some places, if you become a habitual drug addict or alcoholic, in some jurisdictions, if you committed a felony, then you could open yourself for divorce. But the point is, people had to know in advance what it was, and this is an old principle of the common law. So, in theory, the law took over the assumptions of the church. And it wasn't entirely good. Things were deteriorating rapidly over at least a century or more before no-fault divorce was enacted, formally codified in the 70s. But, and as you say, there were some knocks taken during the reign of Henry VIII. And then again, in the English Revolution, Milton wrote his famous divorce tracts. But, so slowly things were eroding. The permanence of marriage was being whittled away on the edges. But it was really, no fault really codified what was already happening. But even then, people didn't quite realize. It took really decades after no fault for these assumptions for people to realize what was really happening. As you point out, people our age and older were blindsided many times in this 70s, 80s, 90s by no fault divorce. No fault divorce was a completely nihilistic. There's no such thing. No, the very concept of no fault justice was originally taken from car insurance, of all things. Now it's been applied to something else I saw the other day. I forget what it was. But the whole concept of
when you said the car insurance thing, I was thinking about this. An accident is an accident. I didn't intend to back into you. It was really an accident. Where marital abandonment, that's not an accident.
It's a pretty serious matter. Exactly.
That you're doing blind. You're choosing to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it was a deception. It was a sleight of hand. Because, as I said, the very concept of no fault justice, I mean, whatever field it is, especially marriage, is a contradiction in terms. You cannot have no fault justice. No fault justice is no justice. It's a prescription for injustice systematically. And that's exactly what happened. And many people were habituated to the common sense, as you say, the Christian common sense, common law principle that marriage is for life. And so for years and decades, not many people took advantage of this. But as they gradually, more and more people did take advantage of it, their spouses were left blindsided by the flagrant injustice that they were victimized, because they would not only be unilaterally and involuntarily divorced, they could also be thrown out of their homes, forced to sell their homes, to find their bank accounts raided, and by far the most serious of all, they could lose their children. Their children could be taken away from them legally through literally no fault of their own.
Right.
And once this started hitting consciousness, I think it started really taking off in the 90s for reasons I can explain. As I say, I think now 25 years later, you have a new generation, really two new generations of young people who I think are more aware of this. One of the striking things to me about the young people today is that they're much more aware of this than we were. But they still, but rather than become outraged or demand that the law be changed or that the Constitution be respected, they simply refuse to marry. They won't marry, especially young men.
And that happens a lot of
that strikes me as a very strange, well,
even because
very strange development in the political culture.
It's become normalized, and people know it's normalized. So marriage becomes a shameful joke. Why would I do that? Why bother? It's a risk, especially both. It's the traditional roles of two-parent households where one person was primarily helping run the household and small children are running around, and another parent is primarily out earning money. That's a very peaceful way to run a household without so much stress with two parents working full time. But either person who does that when they start a family is in grave risk, because with no fault, I mean, you've talked to hundreds, probably, maybe thousands. A wage earner will have the court tell them, we're taking your kids away. You can see them summer part of the time. And then the wage earner is told, we're garnishing your wages. And they're going to do it whether you sign the agreement, mom and dad make a nice on paper amicable divorce or not. They're still going to do it. And then from the perspective of whoever is primarily managing the household and helping raise the kids at home, whoever is doing that and not putting all of their energies into building a career, that person risks also having their kids taken away from them and then be thrown out to figure out how to earn their own living, because two households take a lot more money to support than one household, because mom and dad are in separate households. So, I mean, I'm just going to say the stay-at-home mom. That's the one that I run into a lot. I talk to a lot of the dads whose wives were stay-at-home moms, and then they end up being divorce defendants, and there's no fault. So they weren't told what you did wrong. You weren't told you committed adultery or you're dangerous. They're just like, we're incompatible. Irretrievable breakdown. And, and then the moms have to figure out how to run a household and go out in the workforce after they've been out of it for 10, 15 years. And you're kind of starting at the bottom. I mean, that's just some of the things. Do you have more to your list is what happens, which is so contrary to common sense?
Oh, the injustices are egregious. I mean, basically, you have a government official comes into your home, tears your family apart, often over the objection of one spouse, one parent, and takes the children away, almost always over the objection of one parent. And, how you deal with it, the consequences don't rest with the spouse that moves the divorce or commits adultery or causes the breakdown of the marriage. There's no concept of fault, and therefore no justice. They talk about allocating the children not according to principles of justice or which parent stays faithful to the marriage and the family, but according to the best interest of the child, which is a completely subjective determination open to all kinds of abuse. And it's most often the best interest of the judge and the lawyers and the divorce industry and the people that profit from it. So it's just a travesty of justice. You cannot operate a legal system according to these terms. It's just absolute madness.
I want to throw in some examples that I've seen of best interests of justice amongst the people who correspond with me, with Mary's Advocates. A dad who was abandoned has taught his children the church's teaching about marriage, and mom was cohabiting with a different man at this time. So from the Catholic perspective, just because mom abandons dad doesn't mean she's not married to him anymore, as if dad died. So she's committing adultery. So the husband tells I don't know how old the child was. It wasn't like a little kid, like junior high or high school. I don't know. I don't remember. But then the kid ends up talking to mom about this. And then the court comes in, and the court finds dad has committed this grievous offense of alienating little Johnny against his mom. And all dad's doing is teaching his child what supposedly the mom and dad agreed to raise their kids as Catholic before he goes in. Or I know another situation where the mom was abandoned by the husband, and she was not going to sign the I'm calling it the agreement where mom and dad agree how to split everything, because the mom didn't agree. She was like in a good conscience. She couldn't say, I agree to split everything, including the children, because it was a lie. So she knew she was at the risk of the court was going to do whatever the court was going to do. Well, one of her kids, because the other things the court do, they assign a guardian ad litem lawyer who gets to earn money from the family's assets to help. He supposedly represents the children in the court. So that's money taking away from the family. Then they also assign a court psychologist. But this court psychologist is from the ideology of the no-fault universe. The court psychologist is one of the people you wrote about in this book. So in this situation, the little kid in front of the court psychologist said something about daddy's breaking the family. And then the court psychologist reported this to the court. Again, mom is not doing very well accepting this divorce. She's treating the children badly. So mom has to be supervised if she doesn't stop doing this. She can't say this stuff. And this is what goes on.
No, very much so. Once you start violating people's basic rights and constitutional rights and inflicting injustices on them, one injustice has to lead to the next. And like you mentioned, a parent teaching his children Christian doctrine and about the sanctity of marriage and so forth can be accused of violating a court order. And so, in fact, I have a section in the book where I talk about religious freedom, and it is that's one of the casualties. And freedom of speech. I mean, parents are gagged all the time and told what they're allowed to say to their own children or what they're allowed to say to the press or to the public. So, the most basic constitutional freedoms that we take for granted, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom of speech. Books have been banned by family court judges. You've got to, as Martin Luther King said, an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And once you start, you can't stop. And that's what the courts have done. In fact, in my book, I go down the Bill of Rights point by point. In fact, it's the chapter where I quote you at the outset. And I go down the Bill of Rights and the other provisions of the Constitution. And virtually every single one of them is violated by the family courts on a routine basis, because you can't do it. You can't quarantine injustice. You can't quarantine if you're going to insist on violating people's constitutional rights, then you're going to have to violate all of them sooner or later. We learned this from segregation. We learned this from slavery. Frederick Douglass said that the white man's freedom is marked out for the same grave as the black man's, because once you start inflicting injustices on people, you've got to inflict more and more injustice. One line necessitates another. And you've put your finger up. By the way, could I just mention something, Bai, here? I think it's important for someone in our audience, especially men. There's a lot of, you've shown here the instances where the roles are reversed. By far, it is most often that the men are abandoned by the women, who break the marriage up and take the children and abscond. Yep. And you've pointed out quite rightly that sometimes the roles are reversed. And sometimes I think in some instances it's when the man has some connection with the legal system, and he knows how to play the legal system and use it against the woman, against the mother. But there's a certain kind of feminist woman who often complains about what she calls the injustice and the corruption of the family courts. And you scratch beneath the surface, and you find that she's really not complaining about the courts are corrupt. She's complaining that the courts are not corrupt enough, because the courts are not taking enough, things away from the man and giving them to the woman. But that's not where you're coming from. You're coming from something different. You're coming from a perspective which points out, quite rightly, it's true, that sometimes the roles are reversed, and it is the man or the father that inflicts the injustice upon the mother, and the courts go along with it. So I just want to make that clear to some of our male audiences, that there's a difference. There's something quite legitimate here that your grievances.
I want to ask you about your section about religious liberties violations and the churches in general, any institutional church. What you've written about the churches being negligent in this area. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, the churches are completely feckless and useless. That's the short answer. That's the short answer. The churches do nothing. In my experience, the Catholic Church marginally better than the other churches, but in my experience, in the West at least, is that Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, Jewish, whatever, you name it, even Muslim. There's a lot of misconceptions about the Muslims. These and Sharia law, they are all pretty much useless. The mother pretty much, or the moving spouse, they simply refuse to intervene.
And you get married in a religious ceremony.
Exactly.
You're like, so many of these religions existed before the United States was even a thing. Certainly before the state of Ohio was a thing. So the governance under which one is marrying in their religious mind is in existence before the state, but then the state comes in and does all this stuff, and the religious leadership is totally silent. It gets worse for Catholics, so that's partly why I wanted to talk to you, because
you're exactly right. I mean, basically, you go to a church and you get married, and it's witnessed by the clergy, of course, and it's witnessed by the congregation, and it's witnessed by God. So, in addition to being a legal covenant, which traditionally it was a secular legal covenant, it is also a sacred secular legal contract. It is also a sacred religious contract. So that you've signed a contract and you've agreed to a covenant. And what happens? The state then comes along and tears it up. And so you go to the clergy and the congregation and say, "Look what happened. I married in this church, witnessed by you, the clergy, the congregation, and God." And the state tore up that not only the contract, they also tore up the covenant. And what are you going to do about it? And we'll help you find a lawyer, or we'll say a few prayers.
Right. Help you find a lawyer, or we don't have interest in that. For Catholics, I mean, there's a woman I know who does a support group for people who are divorced or separated against their will, and they hope for reconciling. I mean, sometimes reconciling might not happen, but they consider themselves married because they recognize, look, I didn't get married in this government system. The government system can't unmarry me. And what this woman finds is the people that she supports who are having this position, more non-Catholics, I'm told, are reconciling than the Catholics. Like a non-Catholic abandoner, for some reason, if a serious Christian kind of wakes up and has an epiphany and realizes, it's better for my kids or better for all of us if we work on having an intact home for our kids. But the Catholics are less likely to do that. And Catholics have this thing, which is commonly called annulment. Have you heard about that here and there?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I've heard about it from you, among others.
Yeah.
It's terribly abused. It's abused.
It is abused. Well, and it's not from me. Pope John Paul II talked about it being abused. Pope Leo is now talking about it. Pope Benedict talked about it. There's doctoral dissertations written about it. And it's this psychological grounds for annulment where two people who are more than half normal get married in a Catholic ceremony under the governments of the Catholic Church. One of them decides to get out without any just cause. So the family goes through what you described, this no-fault injustice. And then however many months or years later, the party who abandoned the marriage goes to the church and they're instructed to fill in a long questionnaire about their upbringing and the spouse and both spouses. And then the church comes back and says, well, you were never really married in the first place. And they say you had an invalid contract. It was void. And there are some reasons that have been around for centuries that make sense to me. Like if some lady is about wanting to have kids and then she's just trying to, get gold digger and she's going to divorce him and she just lied to get his money. Okay, she lied. She committed fraud. That's very bad, but that's fault-based invalidity of a contract. Or if someone was truly like schizophrenic, off the chart, mentally disturbed, and for some reason they were having a lucid episode for a couple of months and they got married, and then the truth comes out, this person is seriously mentally impaired. They could not have entered a contract, just like a 4-year-old can't enter a contract. Those are like understandable reasons that maybe this marriage contract was void in the first place. But what's happening in the Catholic Church in the North America is that annulments are being granted for psychological reasons. And Mary's Advocates is trying to help people who are just dumbfounded because you marry with the right intention. The other spouse 100% appeared to be normal. You have kids, they raise a family under normal circumstances. And then years go by and one party wants out. They go get their state no-fault divorce. And then they go to the church and they kind of get their church no-fault annulment.
Yeah, well, Henry VIII came up with, he came up with all kinds of, spurious grounds for divorcing Catherine of Aragon, and it's kind of been the same ever since, hasn't it? He got an annulment, right? She's married to his brother or something. Yeah.
And I hear these stories because with Mary's Advocates, I collaborate with people and show them how to try to uphold your rights when the other spouse is trying to say we were never really married in the first place and trying to get an annulment. Technically, it's called a finding of invalidity of the marriage, but that's too many syllables, so I'll just say annulment. And what I'm finding is there are some dioceses that highly publicize, come get your healing, fill in our long questionnaire, we'll keep you in the dark, and then, a year goes by and we tell you that we granted your annulment. Don't bother coming in and read the reasons for the annulment because you don't need to know. You're just free to go say you were never really married in the first place. And in order to get that kind of decision overturned, someone has to appeal. And you can appeal. And I show people how they could appeal to a tribunal in Rome. And right now, we're working on a fundraiser. I'm going to show the screenshot. Had you had a chance to read this story?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, this is like, I call him the poster child. Right now, we're doing a campaign on Mary's Advocates trying to raise money so we can give a grant to a husband to hire a canon lawyer in Rome. This guy, he and his wife met in college. They were involved in the Catholic, it's called a Newman Center. It's like the Catholic Student Campus Club. And then they get married after she graduates from college. They're both involved in church. They have a bunch of kids. She decides after the seventh kid, I don't know how old the youngest was at the time, she files a no-fault divorce on him. He's paying her. He's having to support two households. Maybe she's working part-time or something, but he was this breadwinner. She was a stay-at-home mom. And then he's experiencing what you're describing of his money is being taken. But he was never told what you did wrong to justify separation. They were having disagreements about the kind of things that everyone has disagreements about. So in her diocese, the archdiocese decided that the marriage was invalid. So instead of her being told, hey, lady, whatever is going on with you and your husband, you need to work on reconciling. This is not okay because the plan you married under was the church's plan for marriage. We don't believe in this no-fault nonsense. The church didn't tell her that. They remained silent. And then years later, they tell her, oh, you poor dear, you were just the victim of an invalid marriage after you answered our lengthy questionnaire. And then the local archdiocese gives him the sentence. So he's appealing to Rome, but Mary's Advocates is trying to raise money to help him hire a lawyer in Rome whose specialty is fighting against these psychological annulments, because it's really shameful. Because he was like a dad, and maybe he had his quirks, but who doesn't? And then the church tells the wife, oh, you don't have any obligations to work on reconciling. You don't have any obligations at all. You were never really married in the first place. And he's saying things like, why would especially any man, why would any man want to get married in this system?
And let me also add what I think the churches should do, because I'm sure that many people out there, especially perhaps non-Catholics, might be asking, okay, well, so you're successful and so you get the Catholic Church to reform their practices. What good does it do? Because the state's not going to change their decision to grant every divorce that's requested. They're not going to change their decision on who gets the children or the house or anything like that. So what good does it do? Well, in my opinion, what the churches should do, in fact, what the churches must do, if they want to have any respect from anybody, I believe that if you're married in a church in front of a clergyman in a congregation, as well as in front of God, and you're faced with a no-fault divorce like that, I think the church, the clergy, and the congregation should go into the courtroom and say, we are parties to this contract. We have standing to sue. We have standing in this case. And you, the judge, are behaving unjustly. You are violating not just Catholic doctrine, Protestant Christian doctrine. You are violating the secular laws, and in this case, the Constitution of the United States. I mean, look at the long, the important landmarks in Western history have been when churchmen, many of them Catholic, but a few Protestants, Thomas More wasn't a churchman, but John Fisher, who was at the time, and others, go into point the bony finger at the civil magistrates and say, you are, ultra vires, you are operating outside, you're abusing the laws of God, you're abusing the laws of man too, and you have no right to do this. And we are here to speak for God, and we are here to speak for justice and morality. And we have standing in this case because we consecrated this marriage. And you have no right to do this. You have no right, for example, to take this man or this woman's children and raid his or her bank account and throw him or her out of their home. You have no right to do this. Not just that you're violating Catholic Christian doctrine, you're violating, you're committing other injustices. And that's what if the churches had any integrity, and if the churchmen had any courage, that's what they would be doing in this case. And I've never heard of it ever happening.
No, and one of the things that we're trying to ask the church to do is to do what canon law, Catholics have a thing called the Catholic Code of Canon Law, and there's a governance system and there's rules about how to manage cases. And a case of separation of spouses is something that the church canonical legal governance system has exclusive competence over. Prior and before anyone who married in the Catholic Church enters a state court, they're supposed to undergo a Catholic canon law trial about a separation case. Now, this used to happen decades ago. Nothing in the church law or doctrine has changed. Somehow it went out of popularity. So we're trying to bring that up. And exactly what you're talking about. The church someone could go into a civil court and say, look, I've got this decree from my church that says the petitioner, the plaintiff in this no fault divorce case is like violating our marriage contract and doing what they weren't supposed to do. And like when we got married in the Catholic Church, part of marriage is raising your children in a morally grounded, virtuous way. And dad's living with his new girlfriend, or mom is trying to dump dad and tell the kids it's fine. It's like the church could do what you're saying, especially because we have a governance system with its own rules already there. It's like yeah, and I feel like the annulment scandal is a leak in the bucket, because people are thinking, oh, well, you know, that woman who abandoned the guy I named in my story, I called him Tim. The woman who abandoned Tim, you know, she and they were never really married. So of course they don't have any obligations. Oh, and in the United States, the practice is that they require a civil divorce before they'll even look into the question of whether or not the people had a valid marriage. And they say they're requiring the civil divorce because it proves that reconciliation is impossible. I'm like, oh my goodness. So someone abandons, like in the moral universe, abandoning a marriage or committing adultery is a grave offense against God and nature. It's a sin. So they're like requiring someone to do the grave sin. And then they say, well, that proves that reconcilable. I mean, with silence.
Yeah, no, it's all self-justifying. I mean, and that's why the courts they're not really courts. I mean, they're not really courts. Judy Perico points this out. She's the one who discovered, among other things, that the feminists were the ones perpetrating no-fault divorce. But they're not really courts at all anymore. They have a preconceived outcome. They have a predetermined outcome. Every petition for divorce is granted, and they're not concerned with justice. Courts are supposed to be, but you know, no fault justice is no justice at all. So they're not concerned with justice. They're concerned with allocating the family's assets, and especially with allocating the family's children. So if you are, if your concern is the best interest of the child, that may be laudable or it may not be laudable. It's, in my opinion, it's not. But it's certainly not justice. It's certainly not what a court is there to do. It's what a bureaucracy does, and these courts are simply bureaucracies. They're not tribunals of justice, because they don't even, strictly speaking, they don't even pretend to administer justice.
Not to mention how much money the lawyers make. It's like divorce lawyers 20 years ago. A husband's lawyer was like $300 an hour, or my wife's lawyer is $200 an hour. The guardian ad litem, the children's lawyer, he's $150 an hour. And the court psychologist, she's $3,000 for the first go around. And like, so every time that a defendant doesn't want to be divorced and is trying to say so, they're costing like $1,000 an hour. And then the lawyers charge money. Like, I know of divorce lawyers who tell the party, do not communicate with the other side. Everything has to go through me. I need to see everything you say and everything you write. So every single communication is an email, and the lawyer charges $0.25 of an hour. And then they're just raking in the money. And then you have no assets left, because at the end of the divorce, the court will order you to split your home. And if neither party can buy out the other, which they can't because they've given all their money to the lawyers, then they give the money to the house to the lawyers.
Yeah, what you're pointing to here is a very important principle, I believe, and something we've lost. And it's not even the purveyors of Judeo-Christian values and the rest. These kind of glib cliches that we hear don't really understand the things that we have lost. This by secularizing the jurisdiction of marriage, what we did was basically the church is pulled out of it. You know, in the old days, what would happen if a marriage or family was in trouble? what would happen? The first line of defense was the church. The clergy would speak to them. If that didn't work, the congregation would speak to them. And if that didn't work, then one of them or both of them would be excommunicated. They would be ostracized from polite company, and enormous pressure would be put on them to reconcile. And there's an important principle there. The church, both the clergy and the congregation, would have a very tangible incentive to heal the problem, to solve the problem, to heal the marriage, to heal the family, because it's not the main thing they do. It's not the main thing, it takes out from, we all have other things to do than sort out other people's marriages, right? We don't have a vested interest in making the situation worse. We have a vested interest, all of us, in solving the problem and healing and this is even true of clergy, even though they're paid. So the church had a positive incentive to heal the marriage and solve the problem. When you secularize it, what you do is you hire a bunch of professionals, lawyers, judges, guardians ad litem, forensic psychotherapists, numerous others, all of whom have a vested interest in inflaming and exacerbating the problem, not in solving it. No one has an incentive to solve the problem once you've secularized it. They all have an incentive to make sure the problem persists and worsens as much as possible because they all make money. And that's social workers is another one, bureaucrats, and that's the nature of bureaucracies. So we really lost something important, which, even if you're not a Christian, you should be aware that the churches may have handled things imperfectly, as we all do, but they didn't have this negative, perverse incentive to inflame and worsen family breakdown. They had an incentive to solve it so they could get on with their lives and get on with their business. So there's something to be said for amateurs, that is to say, congregations, dealing with these problems rather than professionals who can make a fast buck out of them.
I think that would be a great closing point because my work is to try to encourage Catholic faithful to stand up for marriage more, for the ones who've been unjustly abandoned to be heard. Like just hearing you talk, it's such a relief because people don't know how to articulate what's going on. They're just the deer in the headlight, and you articulate it so well, sadly. And then we want the churches to respond differently. And like we're doing this funding campaign right now. It's on our blog. The top article is trying to raise money to hire a canon lawyer in Rome who's trying to stop the psychological annulments that are, I don't even want to talk about it. And then that we would love if the church leadership would stand up more, because presently too much of the Catholic Church leadership is totally silent about divorce. People who are divorcing, like you said, just like everybody else, it's been totally normalized. The kids who've watched their mom and dads be divorced and remarried and divorced and remarried, they know that marriage is a shameful joke. Why bother? So that's when the kids are adults. But then the young people, they're the ones who are experiencing the lack of stability. They're going back and forth between the two houses. It's a primal loss.
Yeah. And I think if there's a single explanation as to why the church pews are empty these days and why people are deserting the churches, this is the test. I mean, either the church stands for something, for some principles that it's willing to, the basic Christian principle, sacrifice. If the churches aren't willing to sacrifice for their own principles, as of course Jesus did, then what's the point of them? They're just a pretty, is the church just a pretty building with a lot of flowers and pretty dresses, and everybody gets all dressed up and gets married, and that's no wonder people are abandoning it. What's the point? The church is supposed to be something that makes a difference in your life, especially when there's a crisis, especially when it's a crisis that takes place on the church's own turf. That is to say, marriage and the family. Churches will speak out against war. They'll speak out against, secular injustices, injustices perpetrated by other people. But will they speak out against, the crisis that takes place on their own turf, in their own, their own ordinances? In the Catholic Church, it's a sacrament. No, they're looking out the window. So if the churches want their pews to fill up again, and they want the faithful back into the churches, I suggest they start taking a stand on divorce. And I think you might see some the so-called secularization that's going on is not inevitable. It's not irreversible by any means.
Something just popped into my head I want to ask you about. If the church and the congregation did all that we're imagining that they would do, and somebody is still obstinate, hey, I'm in love with my new honeydew and I'm divorcing that lady, or hey, I'm tired of him, I'm not in love anymore, the abandoner, the divorce plaintiff, could still do what they're going to do. Is it better for the church to speak up even if they're ignored by the abandoner?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The churches have been ignored, but over the centuries, I mean, Henry VIII ignored the church, but, we still have the verdict of history. We still have, you still go on record and you stand up for what's right. I mean, Jesus was crucified for his principles, but, John Fisher was beheaded for standing up for objecting to Henry VIII's divorce. But that's what sacrifice is the basic principle of the church, whether you're a Christian or not. That's what it professes. And if you want people to take it seriously, the church, then they've got to adhere to those principles. So absolutely, and they've still got their own weapons. They've got an obstinate, as you say, if there's an obstinate spouse who insists, well, there's you shun them from polite company, like the Amish do. You excommunicate, you ostracize, you refuse to have anything to do with them.
In the Catholic Church, there is a Canon 915 where someone who is obstinately persevering in grave manifest sin, they shall be denied Holy Communion. And the reason they're being denied Holy Communion isn't solely to shun them and ostracize them. It's to give them a wake-up call. Hey, if you're receiving Holy Communion, that means you believe what Christ taught. And what you're doing by your actions shows that you're nubbing your nose to God. And that's a very bad place to be. And we want you to wake up. Like, the church is actually trying to be merciful because the church believes in eternity. And our life here, there is such a thing as grave wrong and right. And if you do grave wrong, there is an eternal consequence. Not to mention all the natural consequences that come down here when all the kids are disillusioned and that's all the sadness and breakdown of society. So yeah, the church could do that. And
absolutely,
and kids would know, oh, when the divorce plaintiff is doing what they're doing and the divorce defendant is teaching the children, that's adultery. God says marriage is for life. At least the kids know, oh, the church is on the side of marriage. The divorce defendant is on the side of marriage. It's the divorce plaintiff that's causing everyone trouble, and the kids experience it.
Absolutely. And they eventually will arrive at a conclusion about which side is just and which side is unjust. And I think if you had a similar situation where the whole congregation was pouring into the courtroom, testifying on behalf of the injured party, I think a judge would have to listen, especially if you kept records of it, which family courts don't do. But if you had a transcript and an appeal process, I think there would be a lot of pressure on a judge to rule in the right way. At least allow the injured party to keep his children and home, and sure, the other one the obstinate one can leave with the clothes on his or her back.
And God willing, 1 year from now, we'll have a divorce defendant who wants to do that. We'll have some clergymen in the Catholic Church who want to do that. And we'll be doing another fundraiser for a religious liberties lawyer. Let's do it.
Well, good luck and God bless you.
I know. It's such a battle. Well, thank you, Stephen. I think this has been very interesting.
My pleasure as always, Bai. Keep up your admirable work. God is on your side.
Ooh, that's strong. I better behave. Thank you.
It's a very Protestant thing to say, I realize.
What I like to say is when I die, I pray that Jesus will pat me on the back and say, you ran the race well. That's the goal. Rather than something else. All right. Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
All right.